constructed in 1960 and 1961 to house the architectural firm of Stowers and Boyce. Dan Stowers Jr. joined the firm in 1963. After his father's death in 1971, Stowers Jr. continued to use this building. He maintained his office here until the fall of 2013. Stowers leased the building in January 2014 to the Ecumenical Buddhist Society of Little Rock. And I'm going to tell you a lot about this neighborhood before this building was constructed, so get as comfortable as possible. We can get out some more chairs if anybody needs one. Is everybody cool? All right. The Stowers building is located on Block 6, Lot 9 in the deaf-mute addition to the city of Little Rock. When the original town of Little Rock was surveyed into lots and blocks in the early 1820s, the streets running east and west were drawn to be parallel to the Arkansas River as it runs through downtown Little Rock. So in effect, Little Rock's east-west streets aren't really east-west. They run more northwest to southeast, kind of at a slant on the original city plat. As the city expanded beyond the boundaries of the original town plat during the late 19th century, the street grid was laid out according to the cardinal points of a compass, north, south, east, west. So if you look at a map, and you can pull it up on Google Maps today and see it easily, that the original town is kind of slanted. It's kind of off kilter, and then everything else is platted in a grid north, south, east, west. Interestingly, the deaf-mute addition to the city of Little Rock and the present-day state capitol grounds to the south of us were located at the western edge of the original city plat. This explains why the state capitol is not aligned to be perpendicular to Capitol Avenue. The state capitol was aligned on a north-south axis, while Capitol Avenue has a slight tilt because it was part of that original town plat. The proximity to the western edge of the original city also explains why this block, the 1500 block of West 3rd Street, has an odd shape. It is slanted on the east side to match up with the western boundary of the original city. So just right over here at the edge of the block, it's slanted, and that was the end, that was the western boundary of the original town of Little Rock. And the deaf-mute addition, interesting name, was platted in 1871, and it encompassed the area bound by the city's original western limit, close to present-day Wood Lane Street, West 4th Street, the railroad tracks, and Markham Street. And that addition now includes part of the rail yard. You can see Union Station right through there, and also part of the state capitol grounds. The deaf-mute addition was so named because the 1869 legislation, which authorized the establishment of the Arkansas Deaf-Mute Institute and also allowed the Institute's board of directors to subdivide about 20 acres of the state's property to raise money for the deaf school. So that's why this edition has that name. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, most homes in the addition were occupied by railroad employees and their families. With the Iron Mountain Station, now known as Union Station, right nearby, it was a very convenient place to live. According to the 1897 and 98 Little Rock City Directory, there were a total of 16 households in the 1500 and 1600 blocks of West 3rd Street, and 11 of those homes were occupied by employees of the St. Louis, Iron Mountain, and Southern Railroad, later Missouri Pacific, now Union Pacific. At that time, the house previously located on this site at 1516 West 3rd Street was occupied by Albion E. Borland, a traffic controller for the Iron Mountain Railroad. A wooden viaduct was constructed in 1903 over the Iron Mountain Railroad tracks at West 3rd Street. In the fall of 1903, the Little Rock Traction and Electric Railway Company sent their first streetcars into Pulaski Heights. From downtown Little Rock, the streetcar lines headed west on both Markham and 5th Street, which is now Capitol. Then they turned on to Victory Street, just to the east of us, where they converged at 3rd, and then it went all the way out 3rd till it turns into Markham, and then veered off on Prospect Avenue, what's now Kavanaugh Boulevard, to go up into Hillcrest and the Heights. So this location here on 3rd Street was right on the streetcar line. The present Arkansas State Capitol building was officially completed in 1915, one block south of 3rd Street, on the former grounds of the Arkansas State Penitentiary. So you can only imagine that the character of the neighborhood changed considerably at that time. In the mid-1920s, 13 houses were located in the 1500 block of West 3rd, 8 on the north side of the street where we are, and 5 on the south side. The growing popularity of the automobile in the 1920s also changed the character of 3rd Street. Because this was a major thoroughfare connecting downtown Little Rock to Hillcrest and the Heights, filling stations were built amongst the houses on 3rd Street. By 1926, 2 filling stations were located just to the west of High Street, which is now MLK, just right down here at this end of the block. One operated by the Standard Oil Company and the other by the Gay Oil Company. However, this block of West 3rd remained mostly residential into the 1960s. As the city sprawled farther to the west, many downtown residential areas deteriorated. Between 1960 and 1968, most of the houses in the 1500 block, which all dated to the middle to late 19th century, were demolished to make way for new office buildings and parking lots. The last 2 historic homes on the block were demolished in the late 1990s. In 1960, Mrs. Annis McDonald Shayer sold this lot, Block 9 and Block 6 in the deaf-mute edition, which actually contained 2 houses. There were 2 houses built on one lot. They were very narrow, 1516 and 1514. She sold the lot to Dan Stowers Sr., a Little Rock architect. Stowers demolished the houses in 1960 and constructed the current building in 1960 and 61 to house his architectural firm. And at that time, he was working with Harold S. Boyce in the firm of Stowers and Boyce. Dan Frederick Stowers Sr. was born on April 28, 1914 at Benton, Arkansas, to John C. Stowers and his wife, Blanche Fisher Stowers. The Stowers family moved to Little Rock sometime in the 1920s, and by 1930 they lived at 1009 Park Avenue. John Stowers worked as a painter. Dan Stowers graduated from Little Rock High School. Stowers attended college for 2 years and then worked as a draftsman architect. And keep in mind, this was in the 1930s during the Great Depression. So at one point, Stowers moved 13 times in a single year in order to find work. But he always found it. But he had to move all over the state of Arkansas to find work. He went as far away as El Dorado to get work. On May 23rd, 1936, Dan Stowers and Mary Evelyn Eds of Blytheville were married at Searcy. And whenever I asked Dan Stowers Jr. about that, he said, my parents ran off and got married at Searcy. I don't know why, but that's where they ran off to. Dan and Evelyn Stowers were the parents of one child, Dan Frederick Stowers Jr., born on November 14, 1937. Dan Stowers Sr. served in the military during World War II. He was honorably discharged in 1945, and then he went to work as an inspector for the Federal Housing Administration. Immediately after the war, the Stowers family lived in North Little Rock's Bering Cross neighborhood in a garage apartment at 1708 and a half Nona. In 1948, Stowers Sr. passed his state architecture exam and became a licensed architect. The family moved to Hope, Arkansas, where Stowers partnered with Prescott architect David Weaver in the firm of Weaver and Stowers. Stowers returned to Little Rock in 1951, but continued to work with Dave Weaver until about 1955. In 1959, Stowers partnered with Harold Boyce in the firm of Stowers and Boyce, which was initially located at 1001 West 2nd Street in Little Rock. In 1960, the building here was designed by Stowers to house the new firm, and it was completed in 61. Dan Stowers Sr. was well known for his school building designs. He began a long-term relationship with the North Little Rock School District in the early 1950s, designing several schools, including Scipio A. Jones High School, which was the black high school, Boone Park Elementary, Lakewood Elementary, North Heights Elementary, and Lincoln Elementary. He also designed the North Little Rock High School music building. Beyond his work in North Little Rock, Stowers Sr. designed Benton High School, Benton Junior High, and both Perrin and Caldwell Elementary Schools in Benton. He also designed school facilities in Little Rock, at Sylvan Hills, Gosnell, Searcy, Conway, Rogers, Sheridan, and at Henderson State College, now Henderson State University at Arkadelphia. Some of these facilities were the result of a collaborative effort with his son, Dan Stowers Jr., who came to work with his father in 1963. Dan Stowers Jr. was a 1956 graduate of Little Rock High School. He received a bachelor's degree in architecture from Oklahoma State University, and he returned to Little Rock in +63 to work with his father full-time. Stowers Jr. had previously worked with his dad during the summers while he was in college. He chose to follow in his father's footsteps because he thought that architecture was challenging and there would always be a different variety of projects, something different every day, he said, and there were lots of jobs available. Soon after Stowers Jr. joined the firm, Harold Boyce left, and the father-son team collaborated on many projects. Monday, February 1st, 1971 was a normal day at the Stowers firm, with father and son working side by side. Early the next morning, Stowers Sr. suffered a heart attack and he died at 56. So after his father's unexpected death, Stowers Jr. continued to work in the building that his dad designed until 2013. And I've got to think that's why he stayed in this building and didn't really change much. He didn't tell me that, I'm just assuming that. When asked about his most unique and memorable projects, Dan Stowers Jr. first mentioned the Burns Park Golf Center in North Little Rock, which I have a picture of. If you're not familiar with that building, it's quite unique. Can everybody see that? Okay. You can look at it again later if you didn't get a good look that time. He designed that building with his father in 1964. That was one of Junior's first projects. The circular-shaped building features a concrete scalloped roof. In addition to the building's unique design, the project was memorable because of the political maneuvering required to pay for it. It was an expensive project. The roof was very expensive to construct, and North Little Rock Mayor Casey Lehman really wanted that building to look that way. He wanted to pay for it, and he kept telling the Stowers father and son team that he could figure out how to get the money to pay for it, but the North Little Rock City Council didn't agree with that. They were fighting with the mayor. So he remembered that project. He also mentioned the central office for the North Little Rock Housing Authority at 2201 Division Street in North Little Rock, which he designed in 1966 after his father had designed two of the North Little Rock Housing Authority's multi-level housing units for the elderly, Campus Towers Apartments at 700 Hickory Avenue, as well as Heritage House Apartments at 2301 Division. Referencing a more recent project, Stowers mentioned that he identified the Commons 2 apartments, which were 2 or 4 bedroom apartment units at Arkansas Tech University in Russellville, as being one of his more favorite projects. And coincidentally, I lived in those apartments whenever I went to Tech. In addition to these projects, Stowers Jr. designed a variety of civic and educational buildings, many of which were the result of his father's relationship with different city governments and school districts. Stowers Jr. was responsible for additions and renovations on many of his father's earlier designs. In January 2014, Dan Stowers Jr. began leasing the building to the Ecumenical Buddhist Society of Little Rock, and although this is no longer his office, he's still drawing and working, and he and his wife Sue currently live in Lone Oak. Now about the architecture of this building. Mid-century modern architecture developed from the modernist movement in the early 20th century. Modern architecture broke away from the traditional forms of construction without creating standard characteristics to define it. Modernism incorporated ideas of cleanliness, sunlight, health, and openness following World War I. Cleanliness and sunlight contributed to physical and psychological health, which became intertwined with the built environment. As it applied to architecture, openness referred to open space within a building, along with an extension of the building's interior to the outdoors, like on this curtain wall here on the north side, with design-incorporated walls of windows. The function of a building dictated which modernist form was used. Practicality and simple lines became a theme identified in most modernist buildings and carried over into the mid-century period. Technology and building materials in the machine age emerged to offer different options for construction materials and for methods. Modernist architects used structural steel, reinforced concrete, and glass in their transformational designs. Modernism experimented with new ideas and designs as well as materials in a complete break from tradition. Unprecedented design freedom and immediate cost savings from prefabricated materials encouraged these changes, and I can vouch for that after talking to Mr. Stowers. For instance, he said plaster was the preferred wall material for interior walls at that time, but it was expensive. So the advent of haydite block provided a more economical alternative, and the main construction material of this building is haydite block. Haydite blocks consist of an aggregate masonry substance, but they're lighter weight and they have a higher fire rating than regular old concrete blocks. And screen block, which Stowers used on the east side, outside of the building to shield the exterior staircase, was also an experimental material at that time used to screen the sun and provide privacy. Stowers followed the idea of function over form by specifically considering the building's use as an architectural office during the design and construction process. Somewhat unassuming from 3rd Street, many of you have driven past, whizzed past this building a million times and not even noticed it. The Stowers building was oriented to take advantage of the view to the north and also to provide natural light for the drafting room. Although the majority of the building's walls are solid masonry, this northern elevation is composed of the glass curtain wall. This provided the perfect amount of indirect light for the drafting room. The room was positioned to reduce glare and to supplement the artificial interior lighting to provide the standard 120-foot candles of light required for drafting. 1-foot candle is measured as 1 lumen, or a computation of light intensity per square foot. The north elevation also features a row of porcelain panels below the windows. You can't see them from in here, but you probably noticed them if you parked out back. And those light turquoise panels, of course, complement the other turquoise accents around the edge of the eaves. And by the way, the turquoise color is original, or as close to the original as you can match it today. And now, some info on the interior. Very few changes have been made to the building. There were a few modifications done in the fall of 2013 before the Buddhist Society moved in. This room, the north room, was the drafting room with the kitchenette / lounge over here in the back corner. There was a wall right here. You can kind of see where it was if you look up carefully. You can kind of see where the wall was. Everybody see that? There was a wall right here, had bookshelves on this side. They removed that to open up the space a little bit more for the Dharma Hall, so they use it for now. The decorative screen wall over there behind the sink, though, that is original. They didn't touch that at all. And a narrow hallway, which Kurt is standing right in front of, right behind that bureau. You can see where they closed off a little narrow hallway. Then it ran from the lounge area up into the lobby. They closed that off and used it to expand the size of the bathrooms. The first room off the lobby where you put your shoes, that was Dan's office. The conference room right through here, now it's a small practice room. The western wall of that room, make sure you go in there. The western wall of that room is very unique. It is made from Mexican terrazzo, and Stowers said that they poured a terrazzo slab and then saw cut it into blocks. So you notice it doesn't look like normal terrazzo flooring. It's saw cut into blocks to make that unique appearance. The room in the front, southwest corner of the building, which is now the bookstore and the reading room, that was the bookkeeping and finance office. The lobby and reception area has always been the lobby and reception area. It has the original floor, and make sure that you notice on the wall, there's the original Executone intercom system. It's still there with all the buttons labeled just how they were. The small room in the lobby, kind of glassed in little cubicle in the lobby, that was the plan room. That's where contractors and subcontractors would come in, look at the plans for a different project, so they could figure out their bids, and then the architects would pick the best bid. And the rock garden in front, I had to tell this because it cracked me up. The rock garden in front of the building has been recently redone by the Buddhist Society, and it probably looks now close to what it did originally. and those little low brick walls / benches out front, those are original to the design that Stowers did for the building. But for many years, Stowers Jr., he claimed that he had a really bad problem with nut grass growing up front, of dealing with it. He poured a concrete slab and then he covered it with AstroTurf. And he got new AstroTurf every year whenever War Memorial had an annual sale. I guess they replaced their turf every year, and that's where he would get it. And according to Eileen Oldag with the Buddhist Society, they wanted a building that represented the simplicity of their practices and also had a large open space. So they found a good spot. And now I'm going to invite Eileen to tell you a little bit about the Ecumenical Buddhist Society of Little Rock, what Buddhism is, about their Buddha, which is very interesting to me, and the programs that they offer here. Eileen?
And before I start, I want to introduce one other person from EBS, and that's Doug Holmes, who is standing right over here, who's the president of our board and was president of the board when we went through the search process to find this building. First, thank you all for coming. We're just so delighted to open our house to the community. And we actually do that daily, but I'll tell you more about that in a minute. One of the things that impresses me when I think about Buddhism and I think about this particular building is that both of them, in terms of the United States and Buddhism, came into being at the same time. Certainly people in the United States had heard about Buddhism for many, many decades before the 1950s and 1960s. But it was really in the mid to late 50s and in the early 60s, and of course it was in California, when people really started noticing the Buddhist teachings that were coming directly from Asia with some of the teachers that came. A number of now very well-known and seminal Buddhist teachers moved to the United States and brought with them the teachings that for centuries and centuries and centuries have been practiced in Asia and Southeast Asia. Among the most prominent were some of the Tibetan teachers and some of the Zen masters. And then slowly from the 60s, the understanding of Buddhist practice came to spread ever inward, eventually reaching Arkansas. And by the 80s, there were a number of people here in Arkansas who were spread throughout the United States, but practicing in the traditions, varied traditions of Buddhism. So here in Little Rock, by the 1980s, there were enough people to start meeting together and practicing, and a lot of them did that through the Unitarian Church here. Additionally, there's one of the founders of the EBS was Anna Cox, and she was studying with some Tibetan teachers and was occasionally bringing Tibetan teachers here. In 1992, a friend, one of the organizers of EBS, still a member of EBS, Charles Hicks, purchased the Gans house, which probably this group is very familiar with. It's just a few blocks up 3rd Street. And he purchased it for his law firm, and he added what was known as the carriage house in the back, and rented that to the Ecumenical Buddhist Society. Those people who had been practicing finally got together, organized themselves officially, rented that little carriage house, and met there on a weekly basis, and loved it. I cannot tell you how endearing that space was to the people who founded EBS. But when Charles sold his firm, EBS lost that space, and that was about 2005. So EBS was there about 13 years, and moved a half a block into an office building that was as unloved as the Gans house was loved. Everybody who'd been in the Gans house bemoaned the fact that we were in this office building practicing. So Doug and I actually joined EBS about that time, about 2005. And it was the dream of everyone that we would have our own space. And to me, what is just a phenomenal effort. EBS continued to grow. We probably now have 50 to 75 people that really consider them members, but we probably have 500 people that stay in touch with us, have come through for classes, continue to take part in our activities in some way or another. So the idea of having our own space was really, really appealing. And we set out on that effort. And I think there's an expression, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you get your prince. And we did that in terms of looking at space. We looked at a lot of buildings. And I happened, I think, to make maybe the second trip I was in the second group of people to come to this building. But what I remember is we pulled up in the back and we looked up at those turquoise panels that they're talking about, and I remember saying out loud, I love turquoise. And that initial impression of love at first sight kind of stuck with most of us as we came into the building and started looking at the potential, which we did have to look at, because this room was packed with drafting tables, blue shelves all along this wall, the walls that you were talking about. Dan did a lot of work in here, and most of it was still present when we came through. So he was, and still is, a wonderful person to negotiate with. So we talked about, one other thing, we talked about love at first sight, were the bathrooms, which did have to be changed. People were of one of two opinions. Half the people looked at them and went, oh my word, what did people do in the 60s, you know, that they built bathrooms like this? And the other half said, don't change a thing, pink and black is great. So we had no choice. We really needed to make accessible bathrooms, and those were changed out. But so much of the building was ideal for what we needed that we really weren't able to move in and practice. I would be happy to answer questions later, but I just want to tell you a little bit about the iconography and things that you may see as you walk through. One of the real treasures for EBS is our statue, and this was a gift from Fred Dara, who during World War II traveled a great deal through Southeast Asia. He was stationed there, but then he also went back for a personal tour. And he had a number of relics and art objects from Asia and Southeast Asia. And this was probably among the finest that he owned. And he gave this to EBS in 2001. And it's dated to about the mid-1800s, probably 1860, in what would now be part of Thailand. And it is iron, and it was gilded. If you come close, we ask that you please not touch it because it is old and frail. But you can see how beautifully the eyes are done with mother of pearl, and I think that's onyx, I don't recall now. And you can see some of the original coloring that was in it. You can also see in the beading that is on this some of the tiny mirrored jewels that were in it. So a treasure for us to have in our hall to contemplate. You'll also see that we keep and appreciate the photos of our teachers, living and deceased, and many of these represent the teachers who our practices follow. But the fan that is there was a gift from the teacher on the far left, Fukushima Roshi, who has died. And there are 2 pieces of calligraphy in the lobby that were done by our teachers. And Fukushima Roshi was actually a Japanese treasure, held the honor of being a Japanese treasure in calligraphy. So the fans that he did here, the long calligraphy that's in the front hall, were his gifts to his students here at EBS and are genuine treasures. There's also a small calligraphy done by the Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who is still living but in very poor health, and that was donated to EBS. In the room, the small meditation room, you will see dramatically different iconography. The Tibetan art and the Tibetan thangkas, the wall hangings that are used in practice, are very much from the Indian and Southeast Asian culture. They are highly colored, they are very graphic, very different from what you see in the Zen practices. So what you have here is not a Buddhism, but the many faces of Buddhism as it is held in the hearts of people who practice here in Arkansas. And as ever, it's going to be represented by the people who practice. And what all of us do, regardless of whether we are Tibetan or Zen or Theravada, is we strive to really represent some key principles in the world. And those are compassion for all beings, loving kindness toward all beings, peace in our own lives, and peace in the world around us. And I know many of you probably have your own spiritual or religious practice, but if you ever care to please join us in meditation or in any of our classes, know that that is what we can help you engender and support in the world, and we'd be delighted to do that.